Hello! In this Coolgrad video, we're going to talk about the origin of some common English phrases and their meanings. This is a very interesting video and it's useful for people who are preparing for their GRE, GMAT or TOEFL exams because a lot of these phrases might be used in essays or in some kind of paragraphs in various contexts, and you may not know the origin or the meaning of these phrases. But if you know the origin, how these phrases originated, then you might be able to use them better and also understand the meaning of these phrases in whichever context they appear. For example, don't throw the baby out along with the bathwater. You must have heard this phrase, and it seems kind of crazy because why would anyone throw a baby out along with the bathwater? But, well, the meaning of this phrase is don't lose something precious while throwing away your trash. So the origin of this phrase goes like this. I mean, at least the folklore says, in ancient Europe, I mean, a few centuries ago, there used to be like baths, where they would fill the bathtub with hot water, and there was such a scarcity of water that the man of the house had the privilege to go take bath first, and he would have all the nice clean water, and then he would be followed by all the other men in the house. As disgusting as it might seem, they had to take bath in the same dirty water that was left by the previous person because there was such a scarcity of water in those days. At least that's what the folklore says. And then all the women would go and have their showers, and finally the children, and last of all the baby. I think that's cruel, but by the time the baby would be taken for a shower in the bathtub, the water was so dirty. I think it might have been better for the baby not to have a shower at all, but they would clean the baby in that dirty water. And when you were throwing the water out, the water was so dirty that you might, forget there was a baby in there. You might throw the baby also out. So that's supposed to be the origin of this phrase. But what it means is when you've created a mess and you're throwing away all the dirty stuff you've created, throw away all the unwanted trash, don't lose your important stuff in the trash. That's what it means. With flying colors. So a lot of us have used this phrase. I passed the exam with flying colors. So have you ever spared a thought to think about what it means and how this phrase originated? With flying colors means to achieve great success. It's actually a military metaphor. So for leaving the battlefield still in possession of one's flag. So if you won the battle, you would leave the battlefield with your flag flying, Otherwise, the other person would be either dead or held captive, right? So you left the battlefield with flying colors, your flag flying. So that's what it means. You succeeded. You can use this in any context, not just a battle, like, you passed the exam or you wrote your GRE GMAT and came out with flying colors. But the origin of the phrase comes from a military metaphor. Catch-22. A lot of you have heard of this term. A catch-22 means you're damned if you do and damned if you don't. It's kind of a paradoxical, tricky situation. So the paradox first originated, in the US Air Force. So, a lot of these Air Force personnel had to fly in the battlefield and war zones and, fight in the wars. And they were sent on very, very dangerous and life-threatening, dangerous bombing missions. And the only way they could not go on those missions was if they pleaded insanity. So, if you're in the military and then you refuse to go to war, they can put you in jail for that, in prison for that, that, right? So the only way they could, avoid going to war was if they pleaded insanity. That is, they had to go to the officer and say, I'm mentally incapable of doing this, I'm crazy, something like that. But one of the officers had this particular situation wherein one of his juniors was, trying to avoid going to the war by pleading insanity, but then on the form he had to pick, the option 22, which says, I plead insanity. But the problem is, if you're rational enough to think that if you go to war, you're going to die, therefore I must plead insane. Then you're not insane, you're very much sane. So how could he grant him insanity, the benefit of the doubt, when he was sane enough to determine that this was dangerous and therefore he should claim insanity? So, you're dead if you go and you're dead if you don't. So there was no way around it. It was kind of a paradoxical situation. And that's the origin of the phrase catch-22, because it was the 22nd item on the form on which they had to plead insanity. So that's the origin of this very interesting phrase, catch-22. So some synonyms for catch-22 are the vicious circle. So there's no way you can get out of it. It's like you're dead if you do and dead if you don't. Or it's like the chicken and egg situation. So, many people dispute about, whether the chicken came first or the egg came first, and they can argue both ways. But, it's actually been proven now that the egg actually came first before the chicken. That's a different story altogether. But if you look at some YouTube videos, you'll actually see they proved that the egg came first. And another way of describing this is heads I win, tails you lose. Means either ways I win and either ways you lose. It's kind of a tricky situation. So that's the origin of this phrase, catch-22. On cloud nine. So many of you have heard this phrase. I've been on cloud nine. It means I've been ecstatic and happy. That's what it means. So what is the origin of this cloud nine? It's usually, some people think that the US Weather Bureau in the 1950s would refer to cloud nine as the fluffy cumulonimbus type that is considered really attractive. So that's supposed to be like a happy cloud or something like that. Another explanation is that the phrase derives from Buddhism, and that cloud nine is one of the stages of the progress to enlightenment of the bodhisattva, or one destined to become a Buddha. So people are not really sure of the origin, but then a cloud nine is like a place of happiness, a state of happiness. That's what it means. Blood is thicker than water. This doesn't refer to the viscosity of blood and water. Well, blood may definitely be thicker than water, but this actually means that family bonds are closer than those of outsiders. So if there's a situation and you notice that a lot of family members have conflicts with each other, but they come together as a family to fight off any outsider. So that means the bonds in the family are thicker, closer than those of friends and outsiders. So this seems to have been coined by an author named Walter Scott in one of his works, Guy Mannering, or the Astrologer. In one of his books, he says, blood's thicker than water, she's welcome to the cheeses and hams just the same. So they think he's the one who coined this phrase. But what it really means is nothing to do with the viscosity of blood and water, but it means that family ties are always stronger than those of friends and outsiders. Kick the bucket. So this is really a euphemism, a polite way of saying somebody is dead. To kick the bucket means to die. So you might come across this phrase in some essays or some novels where you say somebody kicked the bucket. It means they died. So what about the origin of this phrase? So usually if a person was to commit suicide, they would climb on a pail, like a bucket, invert a bucket and climb on it, and then put the noose around their neck, and then if they had to hang themselves, they would kick the bucket literally, and then they would die. So that's the origin of the phrase, kick the bucket. It's a euphemistic way of saying to die. To bite the bullet, to accept something difficult or unpleasant, means sometimes you're in a very unpleasant situation in the meeting, your boss is firing you, you want to yell at him, you want to slap him, you want to throw a tantrum, but you can't because he's your boss and he can fire you. So you just bite the bullet. Means you deal with an unpleasant situation. You get treated like trash and you take it. You handle the unpleasantness. That means bite the bullet. So in the olden days, when doctors were short on anesthesia, at time, usually during a battle, they would ask the patient to bite down on a bullet to distract him from the pain. So in war, people would get all kinds of wounds and injuries, and they had to be treated. And if they were low on anesthesia, they would actually literally bite a bullet just to get distracted from the pain. To break the ice. So we've all heard of icebreakers, right? Whether you're a college freshman or in any new company or organization, an icebreaker is like an event where you break the ice between people, meaning you make friends, introduce yourself to people, and build relationships. To break the ice means to break the, anonymity, break the, you know, uh, ice, the barriers between people, and to actually form friendships. So, the origin of this phrase, it dates back by many decades, and when there was not much road transportation, so they would have all these ships, and they were the only means of trade. And at the times, the ships would get stuck during the winter because of ice formation. So if the ship is coming towards land and then there's like huge lumps of ice floating around, they would actually get stuck there. And the receiving country would then send small ships to literally break the ice so that they can clear the way for the larger trade ships to come. This gesture showed kind of affiliation and understanding between the two territories, and that's what it means to break ice. To butter someone up, it means to impress someone with flattery. This was a customary religious act in ancient India. The devout people would throw butterballs at the statues of their gods to seek favor and forgiveness. So there's, the Hindu god Krishna, who used to love butter. So a lot of devotees, they would take butter balls and offer it to the gods and sometimes throw it at the deities. They would offer butter to ask for favors and forgiveness. So that's what it means to butter someone up, to impress someone by flattery. Mad as a hatter. This means to be completely crazy. So this didn't really originate from Lewis Carroll's Alice in Wonderland. Its origin dates from the 17th and 18th century, many centuries back. When in 17th century France, all these hat makers, people who designed various types of fancy hats, they would use mercury for the hat felt. And mercury is poisonous. You deal it with your hands, and if it gets into the bloodstream, it can be poisonous. And the Mad Hatter disease was marked by shyness, irritability, and tremors, which would make the person appear mad or crazy. So they would say mad as a hatter. Another interesting thing, why mercury is poisonous. So even if you consume it, if it doesn't enter the bloodstream, if it just goes through the digestive system and comes out, it's not poisonous. And if you hold it in your hand, why it kills you, why it's poisonous, is because it seeps into the palms of your hand through the pores because of its really high density, and it gets into the bloodstream, and that's when it reacts and causes poisoning. So even if you swallow mercury, like when it gets into the stomach, it sits at the base of the stomach lining, and it doesn't come out like any other food item. It goes to the base of the stomach, and it seeps through the pores and gets into the bloodstream and kills you. So that's the problem with using mercury. It's so dense, it gets into the bloodstream. Anyway, that's a different story, but the people who used mercury to make hats, they suffered from this Mad Hatter's disease, and they said, mad as a hatter. So that's how the phrase came about. So today you can say that person's mad as a hatter. He may not be a hatter, but what it means is he's completely crazy. That's all it means. Cat got your tongue? So the meaning is, a person is at a loss for words. So you say something like you stun somebody into silence, and you say, hey, what happened? Cat got your tongue? So it means the person is stunned into silence. He's at a loss for words. So the origin of the phrase is from, there are two possible origins. So in the English Navy, they used a kind of a whip, a really horrible whip, called the cat of nine tails, for flogging people. And the pain was so severe that it caused the victim to stay quiet for a long time. So they would say cat got his tongue. Or another possible source could be from ancient Egypt, where liars and blasphemers, they had their tongues cut off and fed to the cats. What a treat for the cat. So they would say cat got the tongue. So that's possibly another origin. Barking up the wrong tree. It means to have been misguided thoughts. To have misguided thoughts about an event or a situation, like a false lead. For example, if you're a detective working on a story and you've chasing a false lead. It means like you're barking up the wrong tree. That's what it means. You're trying to accomplish something, but you're following a false lead. You're getting distracted. So the origin is, this refers to hunting dogs that may have chased their prey up a tree. So the dogs bark, assuming that the prey is still in the tree when the prey is no longer there. So sometimes they chase their prey up the tree, and the prey from there jumps somewhere else, and the prey is gone. And the dog continues to think the prey is still there, and it just keeps barking. So, it's like barking up the wrong tree. So that's probably the origin of the phrase. To bury the hatchet, meaning to stop a conflict and make peace. So this dates back to the early times in North America, where the Puritans were in conflict with the Native Americans. When negotiating peace, the Native Americans would bury all their hatchets, their knives, their clubs, and their tomahawks. All their weapons were literally buried and made inaccessible. It was a gesture that said, we want peace. So to bury the hatchet means to resolve your enmity and make peace. Piss poor. You say someone is like so poor, oh my god, that means extremely poor. Oh, they're piss poor. So what it means is, the origin of this phrase dates back to the olden days, a few centuries ago in Europe. They used to use urine to tan animal skins, I believe. And so there were poor families where all the family members would pee in a pot, and every day they would take all the urine and sell it to the tannery for money. So if they had to do this to survive, they were like piss poor. That's probably the origin of the phrase. But worse than that were the really poor folk who couldn't even afford to buy a pot to pee in. They were so poor. So that gives rise to another phrase. They don't have a pot to piss in. So that's what it means. And they were the lowest of the low. Caught red-handed. So we use this phrase very often in our vocabulary, and a lot of people don't know the origin or the meaning of this phrase. To be caught red-handed means to be caught in the act of doing something wrong. So there are two possible origins for this phrase. One is from an Old English law that ordered any person to be punished for butchering an animal that wasn't his own. So the only way the person could be convicted if he was caught with the animal's blood still on his hands. Otherwise there was no way to prove he had done it. So that is one way to catch someone red-handed. Another way is, in some countries they sprinkle a kind of a chemical powder on currency notes as a trap to trap an officer who's taking bribes. And so if you offer a bribe to the officer and the person touches this currency with the powder on it, his hands will turn red due to a chemical reaction. And then the police can arrest him because he's caught red-handed. So that's probably another origin of the phrase. To let one's hair down means to relax or to be at ease. In public, the aristocratic women of medieval times were obliged to appear in elegant hairdos, and they were usually pulled up. So the only time they would let their hair down was when they came home and relaxed. So a lot of these, especially French bureaucratic women and a lot of other European women, they had all these elaborate hairdos and stuff, which took hours sometimes to make, and they had to present themselves in court and all this stuff in a formal setting. And when they got home, they couldn't wait to get all the hairdo off and let their hair down. So to let your hair down means to relax or to be at ease. But that's the origin of the phrase. Rub the wrong way. To bother or annoy someone. Early Americans during the colonial times would ask their servants to rub their oak floorboards the right way. The wrong way, like not wiping them with dry fabric after wet fabric, would cause streaks to form and ruin it, leaving the homeowner annoyed. So they had these oak floorboards, and you had to first wipe it with a wet cloth and then with a dry cloth. Otherwise it would cause cracks and ruin the board. So they would always ask their slaves, their servants, to rub it the right way. Don't rub it the wrong way. It also could have originated from rubbing a cat's fur the wrong way. Like, you stroke a cat, you rub the cat's fur the wrong way, it really annoys the cat. So that could have also been another origin of this phrase. Above board means legitimate. So in any situation you say, oh, the way they are dealing with the situation is above board, means it's legitimate. Meaning card sharps, they place their hands under the board or table to stack the deck. Meaning in a game you're playing with cards and somebody wants to stack the deck with a few good cards or something. They want to cheat, so they would do it like under the table, right, under the board. So if they're above board, then it's a fair and square dealing. So if they're keeping their hands above the board, they can be presumed to be performing without any kind of trickery. Chance your arm means to take a risk. So the arm in question is refers to a stripe of military rank worn on the upper sleeve. So in the military, for the military officials, they give you various kind of stripes and badges which you wear on the arm. So if you take a risk, you might get demoted and you might lose a stripe. So that's what it means. To chance your arm means to take a risk. You risk losing a stripe. Cold feet means to show reluctance. Oh, this person, we want him to work on this project, but I think he has cold feet. Means he's showing reluctance. It comes from a military term. A man who has literally cold or frozen feet. It's a common affliction. It used to be a very common affliction until the late 19th century. He can't rush into battle, so he proceeds very slowly. So that's how the phrase originated. But cold feet means someone who's reluctant. Damp squib means a letdown. You expect, fireworks to be really nice, but then it was a damp squib. You expect a new person on the project to perform really well, but he turns out to be a damp squib. Means it was a letdown. And a squib is an explosive device, often used in a pyrotechnic display, means for fireworks. If it gets wet, it won't light. So it means a damp squib means you expect it to give you fireworks, but then it didn't really take off. So that's what it means. To give a cold shoulder means to be unwelcoming or antisocial towards someone. So in medieval England, if you had unwelcome guests and you wanted them to go, so it was how to do it politely. The host would give them a piece of meat from the shoulder of mutton, pork or beef chop when the host felt it was time for the guest to leave. So they would give them a piece of meat from the shoulder. It was a way to say it's time for you to leave. So to give someone a cold shoulder means to be unwelcome or antisocial towards someone. And it was a polite way of saying you may leave now. So if you hate your neighbor and you give them the cold shoulder, means you're not nice to them, you're not welcoming towards them. That's what it means. Fag end means at the very end, the dregs. That's what it means. It has nothing to do with fagging or smoking. So in the textiles trade, the last part of the piece of cloth was made of coarser material than the rest of the cloth, and it was left hanging loose. So the rest of the cloth would be like rolled up or draped up, and then the part that was hanging loose came to be known as the fag end. It probably is a corruption of flag, means to hang down. So the last part would be left hanging down. The rest of it would be like rolled up. The flag end was like the part let down, and then it got corrupted and it became the fag end. The fag end means the very dead end. That's what it means. Flash in the pan means something disappointingly short-lived. So suppose you get a new person on your project and you expect him to perform really well. He performs well for about 3 months and then he lost all interest. So it was like a flash in the pan. His performance was disappointingly short-lived. So what it means is, something you expected to last for a long time, but it was only, for a very small disappointing period of time. So the origin of this phrase goes to like an old type of gun that had a pan on which a trail of powder led from the charge to the flint. Sometimes the powder ignited, but the gun didn't go off. So when the powder ignited, the gun was supposed to go off, but then the gun didn't go off. So it was merely a flash in the pan. the gun didn't go off, it was just a flash in the pan, meaning it was something very short-lived. So that's what it means. To get one's goat means to irritate someone. This person's really getting my goat means he's annoying me. It's a horse racing term. Nervous horses would be calmed down by placing a goat in the stall with them. For some reason, you place a goat in the stall and the horse calms down. And these rival horse owners wanted the other people's horses to be agitated, so they would steal these goats. So to get one's goat means to annoy someone and make the horse agitated so it would lose the race. But now we use it in any context, not just racing. To get one's goat means to annoy or irritate someone. Gone haywire. We use this term quite often. It means it's a mess. So in frontier towns of the United States, wire would be taken from hay bales and used for domestic jobs, such as hanging clothes or binding the stuff together. A haywire camp was one that was poor, backward, or slovenly. So they had to take wire from the haystack and use it for the hanging clothes and all these kind of stuff. It was a messy kind of disorderly place. So that was the origin of the phrase gone haywire. Hell for leather means at top speed. A horse that had been ridden fast used to be called all of a lather. That's like a racing term. And over the time, this got intensified to the more potent sounding hell for leather. That horse is all of a lather, they would say that. But then gradually they corrupted the words and said that horse is hell for leather. It just means it runs at top speed. Anything that goes at top speed is hell for leather. So that's how the origin of this phrase. Let the cat out of the bag. We've used this phrase a lot of times, but a lot of people don't know the origin of this phrase. It means to give out a secret, to divulge a secret. But in the olden days, farmers would bring suckling pigs to the market to sell, wrapped up in a bag. So they would put these pigs in a bag and bring it to sell. But some of these unscrupulous ones would substitute a cat for the pig. And if someone let the cat out of the bag, their secret was out. So that's what it means. To let the cat out of the bag means to divulge a secret. Make the grade means to reach the standard required. So it has nothing to do with sitting exams. Grade is short for gradient. So in the railroad construction in 19th century America, they had to make sure the railroads were at a particular level without a sharp gradient, which would prevent the train from moving forward. So they had to make sure there was no sharp gradient. So careful calculations had to be made that there was no sudden gradient encountered. So they had to make the grade. That's what it means. That's the origin of the phrase. Make the grade means reach the required standard. The standard in this case being that the rail was smooth. 19 to the dozen. It means going very fast. So in the Cornish mines in the 18th century, pumps were installed to drain floodwater. When working at full capacity, they would drain at 19,000 gallons of water for every 12 bushels of coal that powered them. So for 12 bushels of coal, they would pump 19,000 gallons of water. So it was 19 to the dozen. Over a barrel means to be under somebody's control or threat. This dates back to the Spanish Inquisition. So a form of torture was to suspend someone over a barrel of boiling oil. If you didn't agree to the demands, you'd be dropped in. So that's what it means. You're over a barrel means you have no choice but to obey. You're under somebody's control. So that's what it means, over a barrel. Pass the buck means to pass on responsibility. So in an old English card game, a jackknife or a buck was passed around from player to player to indicate whose turn it was to play. So that's what it means, pass the buck. It also means, you hand over the responsibility to somebody else. Raining cats and dogs. This is an interesting phrase. So it means it's just raining heavily. But why would it rain cats and dogs? So the origin is that in olden days in England, many houses had thatched roofs with just hay covering them. And rodents, mice, cats, all these animals, they often hid and took shelter in these thatched roofs with just hay, okay? And it kept them warm. But when it rained, the hay would get all slippery and wet, and if it was raining really heavily, the cats and mice would actually fall from the roof, raining cats and dogs. So in Norse mythology, the cats symbolized heavy rain, while dogs were associated with Odin, the storm god. So it represented howling wind. So raining cats and dogs probably originated from either of these two sources. It's probably because all these animals would fall, and that's what they said, oh my god, it's raining cats and dogs. A red herring means a distraction from the main issue. It comes from fox hunting. A red herring has a strong odor. Hounds chasing a fox could be distracted by the smell of the herring, and they may start following the herring instead. So if somebody is trying to accomplish something and you show them a red herring, it means you're distracting them from their goals. Round robin. So a lot of people don't know the origin of this phrase. Round robin means it happens like in a circle where nobody has more priority than the other. So robin is a corruption of the French word ruban, means ribbon. So they used to have a lot of documents, petitions, which were originally signed in a circle, so that nobody's name appeared on the top. So everyone had equal priority. It was like in a sign in a circle. So that's the origin of this phrase, round robin. It's like when you perform a certain activity, taking turns, where everyone has equal priority. That's what it means, round robin. Steal my thunder. It means to do something that takes attention away from what someone else has done. It's almost like stealing someone's copyright. So the origin of this phrase is that in 18th century there was this playwright, John Dennis, who claimed to have invented a machine that could mimic the sound of thunder in a theater. And his rivals used the same trick. He complained they'd stolen his thunder. They stole my thunder. So in a general context, what it means to steal someone's thunder means somebody put in the hard work and invented and did something, and you used it without giving credit to that person. So that's what it means, to steal someone's thunder. Wild goose chase means a pointless search. This was once a sort of a horse race. The positions of the horses resembled geese in flight, except it wasn't much of a race because no one could win. So a wild goose chase means a search where you don't get anything in return. That brings us to the end of this video about the meanings and origins of some very common phrases. I hope you enjoyed it. Thank you.